I woke up to the sound of boots on my hardwood floor. Karen stood in my living room, arms crossed, eyes scanning like she owned the place. "You're in violation," she said. I hadn't even put pants on. But what she didn't know, this land is protected by a federal conservation easement, and I don't bluff. I'm Thomas Rayburn. I'm 58 years old, widower, retired U.S. forestry officer, and all I wanted was peace. After 30 years of wildfire response, I bought this cabin at the edge of the preserve, 3 miles from the nearest paved road. Just me, my dog Boone, and a pair of binoculars for the birds. This place isn't fancy. No internet, no noise, just trees, wind, and silence. I wasn't looking to join a community. I was looking to escape one. So when a woman from the nearby development, Karen, started appearing on my private road, uninvited, waving clipboards and snapping photos of my firewood stack, I didn't panic. I thought she'd go away. She didn't. She said my chimney didn't meet aesthetic code, that my truck was too loud. Then one night I woke up and she was inside my home. That's when everything changed. Where are you watching from? Have you ever worked your whole life for something quiet, something sacred, only to have someone try and claim it with a smug smile and a laminated badge? Stick with me. Because what started as a neighborly concern became a legal firestorm stretching from my front porch to the Department of the Interior. And Karen, she had no idea what kind of law she'd just broken. I moved into the cabin in October of 2022. It wasn't much to look at from the outside, 2 weather-worn stories of cedar and corrugated steel, but it was mine. Nestled in a clearing between tall firs and rocky ledges, the cabin sat on 12 acres of land just inside the eastern edge of a federal conservation boundary in northern Idaho. My mailbox was 5 miles from the doorstep. I had to chain up the tires just to get in after the first snowfall, and I loved every second of it. You see, I didn't come out here for convenience. I came for silence. For 30 years, I worked wildfire containment in the western states, boots-on-the-ground forestry division. I've cleared trails through active burns, slept in engine rigs, and carried out more than 1 injured rookie on my back when the wind changed faster than the maps could track it. The work was brutal but necessary. When my wife Ann passed in 2019, I promised myself I'd finish 1 more season. After that, I'd find a quiet place where no one knew my name, no clipboard meetings, no committee votes, just earth, fire, water, sky. I found the cabin listed by a preservation trust, technically too small and too remote to ever be subdivided. It came with what they called a grandfathered residential exception, which, in plain English, meant no HOA, no neighbors, no nonsense. The first night I slept there, I didn't hear a single car, just coyotes in the distance and the low hum of pine trees shifting in the wind. I left the windows cracked so I could smell the forest air. I kept to myself. That was the point. Morning started around 5:30 a.m. when Boone, my chocolate lab, nudged me awake with his cold nose. I'd throw on an old flannel, brew a pot of coffee on the wood stove, and sit on the porch with a blanket and a notepad. Bird counts, weather changes, soil shifts, old habits die hard. After years of logging reports and intel, it was hard to turn that part of my brain off. But this time, the notes were just for me. On a clear day, you could see all the way across the valley. Eagles circled above the river. Elk moved quietly through the brush line at dawn. I started keeping a trail cam on the North Ridge, not for safety, just curiosity. I wasn't a visitor here. I was part of it. The locals at the gas station called me the guy in the woods. They meant it kindly. About a 1/4 mile down the hill, past the boulder slope, the gravel road curved toward a gated development called Silver Hollow Reserve, a recent addition. Cookie-cutter mountain homes with glossy stain jobs, rustic modern glass decks, and driveway saunas. I didn't hold a grudge against them. Everyone has their own version of peace. But their HOA had been forming for about a year. You could tell from the signs posted at the bottom of the shared access road. Speed limit 10 mph. HOA enforced. Private community, no through traffic. All visitors must be registered with security. I didn't think much of it. After all, I wasn't part of the development. My land predated their blueprints by nearly 50 years. My property line was marked, my access road was private, and my deed was filed directly with the Department of the Interior as part of a permanent federal easement agreement. Legally speaking, I couldn't be governed by an HOA if I wanted to be, and I definitely didn't. Still, things were mostly quiet that first winter. I shoveled snow. I cut dead wood. I wrote letters to my niece back in Missoula and shipped her canned huckleberry jam from the brush behind my cabin. Boone and I made a routine out of it. Check the trail cams in the morning, hike to the ridge after lunch, fire up the radio, and listen to weather dispatch at night. That spring, I installed a rainwater collection system, a simple roof catch and filtered barrel setup. I also built a lean-to for firewood using reclaimed lumber I'd pulled from a collapsed barn about 10 miles south. I thought about planting potatoes, but opted for rhubarb instead, easier to manage, less appealing to deer. And somewhere in that second week of April 2023, that's when she showed up. The first time, I didn't even see her. Just noticed a white SUV parked awkwardly at the foot of my driveway, not on the road, on my actual gravel. I was up in the tree line collecting pine straw and heard the engine idle and then fade. When I got back to the porch, the car was gone, but a paper notice was tucked under the split rail gate. Notice: unapproved structure observed. Please contact the HOA for review and compliance options. No name, no contact info, just an HOA logo stamped across the top. It wasn't even my HOA. I figured it was a mistake. Maybe a new hire who didn't realize my land wasn't part of Silver Hollow. I tossed the notice in the wood stove and forgot about it. But the visits continued. Once a week, sometimes twice. Boone would growl at the window, and I'd catch that same white SUV creeping past the outer path, taking photos with a phone, scrawling notes onto a clipboard. She never came up the driveway, not yet. It was late May when we finally met face to face. I was sanding the porch railing when I heard the gravel crunch and turned to find her standing halfway between the gate and my steps, mid-50s, short hair, expensive trail shoes that hadn't seen a single muddy hike. "Hi there," she said, all sugary sweet. "We've had a few concerns about construction compliance on this lot." I told her plainly, "You're on private property." She smiled like I hadn't said a thing. "It's just that your roof catch system may not align with our design covenant." "You're standing on land held under federal easement," I said. "That means not yours, not the HOA's, not negotiable." She blinked. The mask slipped just for a moment. Then she handed me a new letter, this time printed in color, and walked back to her SUV without another word. I stood there for a long time after she drove off. Not angry, not even rattled, just surprised. The kind of surprise that comes when you realize someone thinks they have power over something that I don't even understand. That was the day I finally learned her name, Karen S. Whitmore, HOA President, Silver Hollow Reserve. And that was the last peaceful morning I had for a long, long time. The name on the letter was Karen S. Whitmore, and according to the bold serif type beneath it, she was President, Silver Hollow Reserve HOA. The notice she'd left on my porch was printed in color and laminated. That told me something right away. She expected it to be permanent. The language was a notch more aggressive this time. No more concerns. Now it read, "Final warning. Non-compliant water collection structure, unauthorized lean-to, and potential fire hazard from unregulated wood storage. Immediate remediation is required. Contact HOA enforcement within 7 business days or fines will be assessed retroactively." Retroactively. That was cute. I stood on my porch holding the glossy notice in one hand and a mug of black coffee in the other. Boone sat beside me, his eyes locked on the curve of the road below, ears twitching. We both knew she'd be back. And this time, it wouldn't be with a smile. It wasn't that I didn't know how to fight. I did. I'd dealt with real emergencies, collapsing bridges, shifting fires, air rescues under smoke cover. But this was different. This was pretend power, weaponized through paper, jargon, and just enough fake professionalism to scare someone who didn't know better. And unfortunately for her, I knew better. Still, I held off. I figured maybe she was just overzealous, newly elected. Maybe she needed to throw her weight around for a few weeks to impress someone. I'd seen that before, in management, in field work, even in church committees. Let it blow over. But she didn't blow over. She dug in. By mid-June 2023, I started getting emails. Not just from her either, from HOA Compliance Desk, which I later learned was a Gmail alias she created to look official. Each message was some new demand. Chimney smoke is interfering with neighbor air quality. Exterior of Aben fails to maintain consistent color palette. Pet waste not properly contained per neighborhood standard. Pet waste. On 12 forested acres, surrounded by elk scat and raccoon trails. Give me a break. I ignored the messages. Politely at first. I replied once with a scanned copy of my easement deed, highlighting the part that stated in plain language, "This parcel lies outside any municipal, commercial, or private governance unless designated by federal ordinance." But the emails kept coming. Then, one evening in late June, I returned from a supply run to town to find something different, a small orange flag staked at the edge of my woodshed. At first, I thought it was a surveyor's mark. But no. Tucked beneath it was another laminated notice, this one stamped, "Emergency Safety Review Required." She was escalating. I drove down to the edge of my property line and parked just inside the legal boundary. I took out my phone and snapped photos of the markers she'd placed. I recorded a short video of the unauthorized signage. I hadn't had to document civilian interference in years, but it was coming back to me like muscle memory. By July, things turned surreal. Boone and I were hiking the ridge trail that follows the eastern drainage creek when I spotted something gleaming from between the pines. Binoculars. Not mine. I ducked down low and moved slowly, silently. I came within 30 yards before I saw the white SUV again, parked just over the easement boundary, half concealed behind a tree with a folding lawn chair set up beside it. On the chair sat Karen, holding a Nikon camera with a telephoto lens aimed directly at my cabin's deck. I didn't confront her then. I wanted to, but something told me, let her dig deeper. Later that week, I received a letter not via email or porch drop-off, but certified mail. This time, she'd gone full theater. The letterhead had a logo, probably designed on Canva, and read Silver Hollow Regulatory Board. Inside were 4 printed photos of my property, a zoomed-in shot of Boone napping on the porch, my rain catch system, the woodshed, again, and, unsettlingly, a photo of me, shirtless, splitting logs in the morning sun. There was no caption on that last one, just a date and timestamp, 7:18 a.m., July 2nd, 2023. She had crossed the line from nuisance to stalker, and she still wasn't done. On July 10th, I was inside prepping lunch, just boiling potatoes, nothing fancy, when Boone started barking, but not his usual coyote in the brush bark. This was different, sharper, urgent. I stepped outside and froze. There was a man I'd never seen before standing at the edge of my woodshed with a measuring wheel and a clipboard. "What do you think you're doing?" I called out. He jumped, literally startled. "Ms. Whitmore sent me. I'm with the Reserve's Architectural Review." "This isn't reserve property," I said. "You're on federally recorded private land. You're trespassing." He left quickly, apologized, said he didn't know, but she knew. Karen absolutely knew. She was sending people into my yard, onto my land. A week later, she came herself. No clipboard this time, no smile. It was just after 9 p.m. on July 17th. The sun had dipped, but the sky was still glowing purple-blue. I'd finished a shower, poured a glass of whiskey, and settled on the couch to read when I heard the creak. Not the floorboards. The front door. I sat bolt upright. Boone growled low. And there she was, Karen Whitmore, standing inside my living room, looking around like she was conducting an inspection. I didn't speak right away. I couldn't. My brain was working overtime trying to comprehend what I was seeing. Her clothes were dry, her hair wasn't wind-blown. She had parked somewhere nearby, walked up the path, and opened my door without hesitation. "This isn't your space," she said, like I was the intruder. T doesn't conform to the look and feel of our community. I walked toward the door slowly, staying calm. "You need to leave," I said firmly. She tilted her head. "I'm allowed to inspect non-compliant structures. Not under federal law, you're not." That's when I opened the drawer near the fireplace and removed my old Department of Forestry badge, the one I hadn't touched since I retired. I held it up, not as a threat, just a reminder. She looked at it for a long moment, then she left. No apology, no explanation, just walked back into the woods and disappeared into the shadows. That night, I filed the first trespass complaint with the county sheriff's office. It wouldn't be the last. Because what Karen didn't realize is that crossing a property line is one thing. Crossing a federal conservation easement? That's something else entirely. Crossing a federal conservation easement is one thing, but entering a private cabin while the owner is inside? That's something else entirely. After she left that night, wordless, entitled, disappearing into the woods like a shadow, I stood in my living room for nearly an hour without moving. Not because I was afraid, I've faced worse, but because something about her calmness chilled me to the bone. She didn't act like she had done something wrong. She acted like she belonged. By sunrise the next morning, July 18, 2023, I had drafted a full written statement and filed it with the Bonner County Sheriff's Office, including stills from my trail cam showing Karen trespassing along the upper path. I hand-delivered copies to the county building in Sandpoint and attached a scanned affidavit certifying the federal easement terms on my property. I wanted a record. But I underestimated just how fast Karen could retaliate. The very next afternoon, while I was running repairs on my generator, I heard a thud against my front gate. When I walked down to investigate, I found a manila envelope duct-taped to the wooden post, flapping in the breeze like a flag of war. Inside were 5 citations, each printed on letterhead from the Silver Hollow Reserve HOA. They were labeled unauthorized dwelling expansion, illegal utility modifications, non-permitted rainwater harvesting, visual blight, unapproved materials, tin roofing, split rail fencing, environmental disruption, non-HOA compliant wildlife deterrence. The last one was a dig at the motion sensor lights I'd installed around the coop. They were solar-powered, quiet, and pointed downward, but apparently, in Karen's eyes, they disrupted the nocturnal ambiance. I laughed, for a second. Then I didn't. Because stapled to the back of the envelope was a fine schedule. Each citation carried a fee of $250 per day, beginning retroactively 10 days earlier. Karen was attempting to saddle me with $12,500 in back fines for rules that didn't and couldn't apply to me. It was so absurd, it almost felt funny. Almost. But this wasn't a game anymore. She wasn't just bluffing. She was building a paper trail, one designed not to hold up in court, but to intimidate, to break down resolve, and to slowly isolate me from any sense of stability. I kept every citation. Over the next 2 weeks, the pressure mounted. Every few days brought a new envelope, a new letter, or a new strange car lingering near the edge of my easement, always someone with a camera, or a clipboard, or a radio. She filed noise complaints with the county, citing chainsaw activity on non-work days. She emailed the Idaho Department of Water Resources claiming I was diverting stream flow for my garden. She even filed a claim with Fish Game, alleging I was feeding wildlife. Illegally. Each agency either ignored her or reached out politely, asking for clarity. In every case, I responded with detailed records, geo-coordinates, and copies of my federal land agreement. But it didn't matter. Karen wasn't trying to win legal battles. She was trying to overwhelm me. Meanwhile, the social pressure began. The nearest town, Laclede, had maybe 300 people. Everyone shops at the same co-op, fills up at the same 2 pumps, and gets coffee from the same log cabin diner by the river. And in the space of a month, the tone changed. People I'd chatted with suddenly avoided eye contact. Neighbors I barely knew started referring to me as that guy off the trail. One man muttered, "Troublemaker," as he passed me on the co-op porch. It was subtle, but steady. Karen was using the oldest trick in the book, social isolation. She'd seeded just enough rumors, unpermitted building, environmental violations, boundary disputes, that the Karen narrative began to flip. To those in the HOA, she was the protector, keeping the riffraff from spilling over into their community sanctuary. And to them, I wasn't a veteran or a conservationist or even a landowner. I was an eyesore, a stubborn old loner, an obstacle. That's when the anonymous letters started. The first was tucked under a rock on my porch. "You're bringing heat on all of us. Get in line or get out." Another showed up inside my mailbox, illegal in and of itself. "Karen's not the only one who wants you gone. You're on borrowed time." The handwriting was shaky, like someone trying to disguise it. I installed more trail cams, moved them higher, started logging every entry and exit from the property. My training kicked back in hard, like I was back in wildfire mode. Except this wasn't nature I was fighting. It was people. Organized people. The worst blow came on August 3rd, 2023. I had driven into Sandpoint for a vet appointment for Boone, and when I came back I found my gate chain shut from the outside. Someone had wrapped a heavy logging chain across the posts and padlocked it tight. There was no note this time, just a red sticker slapped to the center plank that read, "Notice of imminent HOA-led remediation." I had to hike back to town, call the sheriff, and wait nearly 6 hours before a deputy arrived with bolt cutters and a clipboard. His name was Deputy Ramirez, and he took one look at the sticker and muttered, "They're escalating." He told me, off the record, that I wasn't the first person Karen had tangled with. A local contractor had been pushed out the previous year after trying to build a barn too close to the HOA boundary. A couple with a small goat herd had their fencing slashed in the night. All quiet threats, all hard to trace. But I wasn't like them. I wasn't going to roll over, especially once I discovered the motive. That evening, while reviewing footage from my hidden camera up the hill, I noticed something unusual. Karen wasn't alone in her visits. She was accompanied sometimes by a man in a navy windbreaker with a file folder. Using an old contact from my time in the Forestry Service, I traced the license plate of the SUV he drove. It belonged to a real estate firm based out of Coeur d'Alene, a firm that had, just 6 months earlier, filed a petition to rezone a 40-acre section adjacent to my land. They needed my parcel cleared, not legally, but practically. Because if I was seen as a liability, a fire risk, a non-compliant nuisance, the CO, immunity would support pushing me out. This wasn't about fencing or firewood, this was about profit. And Karen? She was their opening move. But they'd made a mistake, because I wasn't just a homeowner. I was a former federal officer, trained in land management, jurisdictional boundaries, and evidence documentation. And if they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. They were going to get a fight. What Karen and her friends didn't realize was that I'd been preparing for one my entire career. Before I ever bought this land, before I even retired, I worked closely with the Bureau of Land Management, the Department of the Interior, and the National Fire Protection Association on dozens of boundary enforcement cases. Part of my job involved identifying illegal encroachments, fraudulent land transfers, and the misuse of conservation easements. They thought I was just some cranky recluse with a dog and a woodshed. They didn't realize I had testified in 3 federal hearings on property integrity. They didn't know I'd personally helped write sections of the very conservation policies they were trying to ignore. They had messed with the wrong person. I started by dusting off the fireproof lockbox beneath my floorboards. Inside were copies of every legal document I'd signed in the last 5 years, including the full easement covenant for my parcel, signed by 2 federal witnesses and stamped with an official National Land Trust seal. This was no vague handshake deal. It was federal code, Title 16, Chapter 1A2, Subchapter 9, which explicitly states that any attempts to interfere with an easement holder's rights to peaceable use can be considered a Class A civil trespass. I made 6 copies, one for the sheriff, one for the U.S. Forest Service field office, one for my attorney in Sandpoint, and one for a very old friend, Raymond Elliott, a former DOJ land use prosecutor who owed me a favor. I also dug into the real estate firm behind Karen's visitor, the one I'd traced back to Coeur d'Alene. Turns out the firm Clear Rock Properties had applied for a planned community annex that depended on rezoning 40 acres adjacent to my easement. The catch? The rezone couldn't proceed if the neighboring land showed any signs of legal dispute, community instability, or conservation violations, meaning they needed me to look like a threat. Karen was the chess piece, the fixer, the HOA bad cop. Every complaint she filed, every fine she issued, every anonymous whisper about violations, it was all meant to build a paper case against me, so Clear Rock could argue I wasn't a suitable neighbor for their planned expansion. Too bad for them. I keep everything. Trail cam footage, time-stamped, emails, archived in duplicate, trespass footage, motion captured, date-coded, and backed up in the cloud, letters, preserved in sealed bags with chain of custody documentation. In wildfire work, paperwork is half the battle. If you can't prove when, where, and why something burned, you're held liable. So I learned to document everything. On August 6, 2023, I set up a meeting at the county recorder's office. I walked in with a binder so thick the receptionist asked if I was a lawyer. Inside were a printed timeline of every contact Karen had made with me, a record of every fine and citation issued, photos of every illegal posting on my property, screenshots of her emails, aerial maps proving she crossed the easement line on 6 occasions, camera footage of the man with the measuring wheel, trail cam clips of Karen entering my cabin, a notarized letter from Deputy Ramirez describing the chained gate incident, a printed copy of Clear Rock's zoning proposal, along with their conflict of interest disclosures. I laid it all out on the table for the county legal rep and a junior FIDE investigator. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. I just told the truth. Clearly, calmly. They were quiet for most of it, just flipping pages, jotting notes. Then the county rep looked up and asked, "Has she been served with a no-contact order yet?" Not if, but when. The next day, I filed the paperwork. But I wasn't done, because the real blow was coming. I contacted Raymond Elliott, my former DOJ colleague, and gave him the full rundown. He was retired but still sharp, still connected. He reviewed the footage, the letters, the land use proposals, and said, "Tom, this isn't just trespassing. This is targeted harassment with intent to interfere in federal jurisdiction. We can make this big." We agreed to start quiet, but precise. Raymond drafted a federal notice of encroachment, citing violations of the Conservation Land Act, trespass under federal easement protocol, and conspiracy to undermine protected zoning. He sent a copy to the HOA's legal representative, the Clear Rock corporate office, the State Department of Environmental Quality, and, most deliciously, to Karen Whitmore personally via certified mail. Within 72 hours, I got a call from a blocked number. I didn't answer. Then an email marked urgent. "Mr. Rayburn, this appears to be a misunderstanding. We'd like to resolve this amicably." Too late. I also filed a civil restraining order citing home intrusion. The judge signed it the same day after reviewing the still of Karen standing inside my cabin, hands on her hips, like she owned the place. On August 12, 2023, a deputy delivered it to her at a Silver Hollow HOA board meeting. According to another attendee, who would later forward me a recording, Karen turned beet red and stormed out before the meeting was even called to order. But I wasn't after embarrassment. I was after protection. So I took it one step further. Using the language in the Clear Rock zoning documents, language that referred to existing neighborhood cohesion and the importance of a shared visual identity, I submitted a counter-report to the County Planning Commission. I attached proof that Silver Hollow was currently under formal dispute with a federally protected landowner and argued that any expansion would violate the spirit of their proposal. A week later, the commission issued a temporary freeze on the rezone application. Karen's influence began to crack. The anonymous letters stopped. No more citations, no more orange flags duct taped to my gate. The SUV disappeared. And then came the real turning point. The HOA's own treasurer, Brenda Hale, emailed me quietly one night. She said she was resigning from the board and wanted to apologize. Karen had pressured her to sign off on citations without any evidence, had threatened to embarrass her at the next meeting if she didn't vote the way Karen wanted. She forwarded emails, screenshots, meeting notes. And just like that, I had a whistleblower. One final twist? Karen had tried to get a private security firm to drone survey my property, but the request had been denied by the FAA because of my land's conservation designation. She'd known this, tried anyway, and got flagged. So now the feds were watching her too. By late August, the silence around my cabin was back, but this time it was heavy. Not peaceful, not fearful, just loaded. Because something was coming. Something big. And next time, I wouldn't be the one on the defensive. By late August, the silence around my cabin was back, but this time it was heavy. Not peaceful, not fearful, just loaded. Because something was coming. And this time, I wouldn't be the one on the defensive. The HOA held its quarterly general board meeting on September 2, 2023, inside the community lodge at the base of the Silver Hollow development. I wasn't technically a member, of course, but the bylaws, which I had now read cover to cover, allowed neighbor stakeholders and adjacent landowners to attend the open forum segment of any general meeting. So I RSVP'd, formally, in writing, certified, and I brought a guest. Raymond Elliott, my old DOJ friend, wore his signature blue blazer and tortoiseshell glasses. Despite being technically retired, he still carried himself with courtroom gravity. His presence wasn't for show. It was strategic. I wanted Karen to see that I wasn't alone anymore. We arrived 5 minutes early. The lodge was staged like a suburban city council meeting, folding chairs in rows, a projector screen near the fireplace, and a long plastic table with 7 HOA board members sitting behind name placards. There were snacks on the back table, lemonade, store-bought cookies. All very civilized. Until I looked at the far end of the board table. There she was, Karen S. Whitmore, in a stiff linen blazer and forest green slacks, flipping through her agenda notes like a trial attorney about to deliver opening arguments. Her face turned stone when she saw me. But behind that forced smile, I saw something else. Nervousness. The room filled with about 30 residents, most of them couples, mid-50s to 60s, dressed casually but seated with military posture. A few whispered when Raymond and I sat down near the front. The meeting opened as expected. Roll call, approval of minutes, updates on the perimeter fence repairs, and new guidelines for mailbox uniformity. Then came the words I'd been waiting for. Open forum begins now. Please limit comments to 3 minutes. I raised my hand. So did Raymond. Karen's eyes darted to the Vice President, David Kincaid, who read our names from the visitor log. Mr. Thomas Rayburn, you may proceed. I walked to the center rug. No microphone, no podium. So just me and a folder. Thank you. My name is Thomas Rayburn. I live at parcel number 438G, directly north of this community. I'm not an HOA member, nor do I fall under your governance. However, your board's recent actions, specifically those of President Whitmore, have had direct and unlawful impact on my private, federally protected property. Karen shifted in her seat. Someone coughed behind me. I opened the folder and held up a laminated page. This is a copy of my conservation easement, recorded with the Department of the Interior and enforced under federal law. This document alone exempts my land from any HOA oversight, rule, or aesthetic standard. I flipped to the next page. This is a photograph of your president inside my cabin, taken without invitation, without notice, and while I was asleep. That's called criminal trespass. The room changed. Chairs creaked, arms crossed, necks craned. I continued. This is a written notice she duct-taped to my gate. Here's the camera footage of her placing it. This is the orange flag she used to mark my woodshed. Here's the letter she sent claiming my solar lights caused environmental disruption. Page after page. Here is a drone survey request she filed under the name Silver Hollow Executive Compliance, denied by the FAA for violating protected airspace. I paused. Shall I continue? Karen's voice sliced through the silence. None of this is relevant to HOA business. Mr. Rayburn does not reside within Silver Hollow. Raymond stood up, calm, collected. Madam President, with all due respect, these actions fall well outside your authority and directly violate Section 18B of the HOA Charter, which prohibits board members from acting as enforcement officers on private land. Moreover, under Title 16 U.S. Code, Mr. Rayburn has legal standing to file both civil and federal complaints. A murmur swept through the room. One man raised his hand. Wait, is this about the property boundary dispute you mentioned last month? Karen ignored him. But another woman stood up, Brenda Hale, the treasurer who had emailed me. I need to say something. Karen snapped, Brenda, we've moved on. No, we haven't. Brenda turned to the crowd. Everything he said is true. I saw the emails. I was pressured to co-sign complaint forms I didn't read. I resigned because I was being manipulated into signing off on fines that didn't legally exist. Gasps now. Real ones. Karen's voice cracked. Brenda, you're out of order. Then David Kincaid, the vice president, cleared his throat. I move to suspend President Whitmore from her duties pending formal review. The room froze. A vote was called. Immediately, 4-1, with one abstention. Karen stood up so fast her chair toppled backward. She stormed out the side exit without a word, her briefcase swinging like a weapon. I stood there, still holding the folder. And then, the thing I didn't expect. Applause, not loud, not theatrical, just a ripple of slow, relieved claps, and then questions. What is a conservation easement, really? How did she get away with this for so long? What else was she doing behind the scenes? Raymond handed out business cards. Brenda came up and hugged me, quietly. I should have spoken sooner. I shook her hand. You spoke when it counted. By the time we left the lodge, the air felt different. Lighter, sharper, like the forest after a fire, charred, but clean. That night, I sat on the porch with Boone. No orange flags, no email threats, no SUV creeping around. Just crickets, breeze, the occasional hoot from an owl in the ridgeline. I poured myself a drink and raised it toward the woods. To quiet, I whispered, and to standing your ground. Because in the end, Karen didn't just lose a vote. She lost her mask, her grip, her whole game. And me, I kept the folder, just in case she ever thought about coming back. I kept the folder, even after the vote, after the resignation, after the applause and the slow-motion unraveling of Karen Whitmore's little empire. I tucked it into the same fireproof lockbox where I'd kept my easement documents, folded beneath my forestry badge and a photo of Anne and Boone as a pup, not because I planned to use it again, but because I'd learned something over the past few months. Peace is worth documenting. The day after the board meeting, I received a call from Deputy Ramirez. He sounded lighter, like someone who'd been waiting for a hard problem to solve itself. "Thought you should know," he said. "Karen's lawyer filed a withdrawal of representation this morning. Something about client unreliability, and the county's initiating an ethics review on her zoning interference." I thanked him and hung up. I didn't celebrate. Not exactly. There wasn't a moment of triumph. No music swelled. No champagne cork popped. But something had changed. Something fundamental. For the first time in nearly a year, I walked the edge of my property without glancing over my shoulder. By mid-September, the Silver Hollow HOA sent out a community bulletin announcing Karen's resignation. The board was being restructured. Fines were paused, pending review. Several residents wrote me letters. Handwritten, no threats, no legalese. One from a man named Glenn, who had voted for the fence ordinance Karen pushed months earlier. "I didn't realize what was happening. I'm sorry. You have a beautiful piece of land up there. I hope it stays wild forever." Another from Marjorie, who lived 3 houses from the community lodge. "I've started reading about conservation easements. I didn't even know we shared a border with one. Your presence here makes this place richer, not poorer." Funny how fast people wake up once the curtain drops. Brenda Hale reached out again, not with an apology this time, but an invitation. The HOA had formed a land use review committee to make sure nothing like this happened again. She asked if I'd be willing to advise, informally, just a few QAs, maybe a community talk. At first, I wanted to say no. I wanted to stay in the trees, stay quiet, let them sort themselves out. But something in me hesitated, because silence is what enabled Karen. So I agreed. Once. I sat down in their lodge and explained the basics. What federal easement land means, how conservation designations are recorded, and what private ownership under public trust really is. And most importantly, what an HOA can't do. You'd think they would have tuned out, but they listened. Really listened. Afterward, a woman named Tina, a single mom who had moved to Silver Hollow to escape city chaos, asked if I'd ever consider helping the county draft new buffer zone language between easement parcels and developments. That's how it started. Meanwhile, Karen vanished. Word floated around that she'd moved to Spokane, or maybe Coeur d'Alene, depending on who you asked. Clear Rock Properties scrubbed her name from their expansion documents. Their zoning application quietly expired without resubmission. Raymond told me that a background inquiry had been opened. No formal charges yet, but a review of her handling of board authority and multiple complaints filed from prior communities. Apparently Silver Hollow wasn't her first HOA position. It was just the one where she finally got caught. I didn't press for criminal charges. The federal trespass report was active and filed. The record would follow her. And in a way, that was enough. Because she didn't just lose the vote, she lost the illusion that she had the right to rule everyone around her. And to someone like, Karen, that's the real sentence. The cabin changed after that. Not physically, but in tone, in energy. Boone stopped growling at every vehicle that passed. I took down the last of the trail cams, not because I stopped being vigilant, but because I wasn't under siege anymore. The woodpile stayed stocked, the rainwater barrels filled with the first October storm. And one crisp morning, as I watched the sun burn mist off the ridge, I caught sight of something I hadn't seen in years, a pair of fox kits darting through the brush near the edge of the cedar grove. I took that as a sign. Later that month, I heard from Raymond again. He asked if I'd consider speaking at a land management conference in Boise. Nothing big, just a panel on conservation and community where they collide. I laughed at the irony, but I agreed. Because the truth is, This whole story didn't start with confrontation. It started with preservation. It started with a man who wanted to be left alone and had to remind a community what boundaries actually mean. And now? Now the coop stays, the rain catch stays, the motion lights stay, the old truck stays, the land stays wild. Just as it was meant to. And Karen? She's a memory now, a cautionary tale that neighbors share in hushed tones at the general store when someone new starts asking questions about fencing and siding. As for me, I'm still here, still brewing coffee before dawn, still counting birds, still planting rhubarb, still living without permission. I look around this place every morning and think, you almost lost this, not through force, but through paper, pressure, and pretense. And I wonder how many others have. How many people, without training, without allies, gave up the thing they loved most because someone in a blazer made them feel like they didn't have a right to it? That's why I told my story. Not out of pride, but because someone else might need to hear it. They tried to chain my gate, silence my voice, and write me off as a nuisance. But all they did was remind me that silence isn't the same as surrender. And now they know exactly whose land this is. If you've ever had to stand your ground against someone louder, richer, or more entitled, drop your story in the comments, because this wasn't just about land. It was about boundaries, the kind we build with dignity, not fences. Like, share, subscribe. And remember, peace isn't something you're given, it's something you defend.